to get started, although some folks may still be filtering in, but that's just fine. We just want to make sure that we have enough time to speak with our guest. And so welcome to the Business of Health Career Networks program, Fireside Chat tonight with Tricia Garland. She's the Vice President of Strategy, Planning, and Performance in the Diversified Group with Blue Cross Blue Shield, North Carolina. That's a moniker there. So that's a long title that you have, but we're so glad to have her with us tonight. Thank you all for joining us this evening for the Fireside Chat, which is part of our UNC Center for the Business of Health's Career Networks program. Career Networks is a constellation of resources meant to educate and create community around the continuously evolving healthcare ecosystem. You can explore the CBOH Career Networks platform via the URL that I'll paste in the chat box in just a moment. For tonight's panel, we ask that you turn your video on and mute your microphone while you're not asking questions. Tricia will begin with the story of her healthcare industry journey, also talk a bit about her background, her education, all that contributed to where she is today. Then we will have a few moderated questions that I'll ask, and then we'll open up for audience questions. If you have a burning question in the meantime, please feel free to raise your virtual hand, or you can use, some folks might be in clinic. So if you are in clinic and cannot turn your camera on or use your audio, you feel free to paste your questions in the chat box and I'll be monitoring those. I'm Suzanne Killian, the Associate Director for Student Engagement with the Center for the Business of Health. And I have Erin Leach, our Program Manager, behind the scenes tonight. So we're so glad you're here. We're so glad Tricia is here. So Tricia, I'm going to let you take it away.
Awesome. And hello, everyone. Excited to be here speaking with you all. As Suzanne mentioned, I'm Blue Cross North Carolina's Vice President of Strategy, Planning, and Performance for a Diversified Business Group. I agree with her. It is an extremely long, unnecessarily long title. But what it really means is that I am responsible for all of our non-insurance revenue for Blue Cross, which is probably a bit of a head scratcher, like non-insurance revenue, Blue Cross. But for folks who have spent time studying the payer space, it may make sense. The clearest way to explain this is for folks who are familiar with the recent shooting of the United CEO. I think what folks saw on the other side of that was a lot of anger and frustration at the American healthcare system, and specifically payers and their role within it. And a lot of that anger comes from a place, from my perspective, of the lack of affordability of our system in the US. And so ultimately, what folks are looking for insurers like Blue Cross and others to be doing is to make healthcare easier and more affordable. The issue with the way that the system is set up is that if you kind of wait until you get to the end and all your insurer is really doing is trying to negotiate with hospitals when they don't really have that much of a negotiation power, because I think all of us would also be frustrated if the key hospital that we wanted to go to in the state was not in network, and hospitals know this. You're not going to be in a great place to actually drive affordability, to actually make a difference in terms of how people are accessing care and making that simpler and easier. It requires us to play a different role and to try and start driving system change to create what it is that, we all agree is the outcome that should be happening for US healthcare. And that's really what my team does. And we'll talk more about what it is and what that means as we get into it. But zooming way out and kind of talking you guys through my career journey, what I can tell you is that I have had a career path that only makes sense in hindsight, and perhaps not even then. But there are two things that I will give myself credit for in terms of how, in terms of things that have been helpful for propelling myself upwards. And that's finding where my passion meets my strength. And so it really requires you to understand both of those things about yourself. Um, and when you can find places where the things that you're passionate about, the things that you care about also match your unique skills that you bring to the table, you will have a competitive advantage in every job that you take, which will allow you to get those promotions and to get that forward progress in your career. Um, when thinking about, how I started my career journey I give a lot of credit actually to my time at UNC, Kenan-Flagler. I was actually an undergrad Kenan-Flagler. And I went into Kenan-Flagler without a lot of certainty about what it is that I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be in healthcare, because like many overachieving young students, I had thought that I wanted to be a doctor, realized I didn't really want to do that, but I was still very passionate about healthcare, but I didn't know much else beyond that. I got involved in the consulting track at Kenan-Flagler, and I realized that that was where a lot of my passion and interest lay because you get exposed to solving really tough challenges. And it's fun because you get to get up to speed on in new spaces really quickly. And it was through the work that I did there that I actually was in one of the case competitions that UNC had. And it was a Blue Cross sponsored case competition, and I got to learn a ton about the company, how it's actually it's a payer, but a payer with very different incentives, than kind of a traditional national payer. We're a nonprofit, which causes us to show up differently, because we're incented to. And for me, that was kind of in many ways the start of like falling in love a little bit with Blue Cross and the place that they hold both within the state but also within the country. And so after winning that case competition, I ended up taking an internship with Blue Cross the summer after my junior year. And it was fantastic and had a great time, but I knew that I needed to go and get a broader understanding of how healthcare works, incentives, how the dollars move in healthcare, in order to really be able to have a seat at the table for driving strategy for the long term. And that was really important to me. And so I decided that I wanted to go into consulting. But I also knew because I was very focused on healthcare and I was very focused on wanting to understand incentives specifically in healthcare that I didn't want to just go to any consulting firm. I wanted to go to a consulting firm that would allow me to specialize in healthcare upfront, and that would give me an understanding of incentives. And so I ended up going to a bit of a boutique firm. It was kind of a non-traditional path. Um, it's a company that doesn't even exist anymore because it was acquired by another company. Anyway, long, boring story there. But I remember starting on my first day and having such imposter syndrome because we were going around the room and everybody was talking about where they were from, and what their background was. And everybody there had a PhD from an Ivy League, or the one other girl who didn't fit the mold, had two master's degrees from an Ivy League. And there I was, little old me, just graduated from UNC, no, no fancy degrees. And I was like, oh wow, I am not quite sure exactly how I was able to get here. But I will tell you how I was able to get there was through my professors at UNC. It was through getting to know one of the professors at UNC that when I put my name in for the job, he said something to the guy hiring for the job, and they took a chance on me, even though I was kind of a non-traditional background. So just something to file away because the connections and the professors that you have at UNC can actually, at least in my case, kind of change the trajectory of certain parts of your life. Um, So anyway, I do that job. It's really interesting work. So it was primarily focused on pricing and market access for pharmaceutical and biotech clients. And it was in the early days of cell and gene therapies. So if folks are not familiar with those are, they're essentially curative drugs. But because they are curative, they are also very expensive. And it was at a time when the system hadn't even really contemplated how on earth you would be able to pay for those. And so it was really interesting work trying to figure out, okay, what's a way that we might be able to make this work both in the US and in other countries that will allow us to kind of create a new way of doing things. And I think, um, as kind of a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed consultant who was very much an idealist and didn't have a lot of exposure to how these things could really play out in the real world. One of the most useful things that I could kind of offer to you all from that point in my career was the benefit of talking to people who have been through different rounds of health innovation and have seen how different things have played out. Because what I can tell you is that in most cases in healthcare, I'm going to put AI aside, but in most cases in healthcare, what's old is new again. And there's been some way that it's been tried and tested before that you can learn from and apply to how you think about this new use case that's coming down the pipe. And so that's a big part of, what I did in my role, even whenever it wasn't something my bosses were asking me to do, was to do a bunch of phone a friends. And some of those phone a friends were actually folks at UNC who were working in things related to this. Um, so I did that for a number of years. And then you got to a point where you've reached the end of being able to write out a theoretical of how something that hasn't really happened yet in the industry is going to play out. There weren't enough cell and gene therapies really launching to see what models were going to take, how people were going to pay for it, how you think about, you know, outcomes and tracking those and how those tie to dollars to make those projects really still interesting or even worthwhile. And so a lot of the work that I started to then get tasked with at my consulting firm was, at least for me, the underbelly of healthcare. It was trying to essentially figure out how to maximize dollars and in a way that's maybe not beneficial for the system. Um, and those projects were not as appealing to my passion, and it showed up in how I performed at work. I just was not as interested in what I was doing. And it was hard for me to care because it just wasn't tied to my passion. And so I realized then that it was time for me to leave, and go to a place where I was reconnected from a passion perspective, because that is important to me, in my ability to kind of be like bought in and bring my best self to work. So um, this was all happening at a time when North Carolina had a lot of really interesting health innovation. Well, I would say at the beginning of the time that North Carolina had a lot of really interesting health innovation going on, because I think we are still very much in that chapter. We had a lot of bright minds from Washington, D.C. kind of come down and be part of the North Carolina health ecosystem. Many of those folks are here. Many new folks have kind of come down and been part of that ecosystem. And I was excited to kind of join in on that. And actually, this story also connects back to UNC because I knew that it was time that I wanted to come back to Blue Cross because there was a lot of interesting people and movement happening at Blue Cross at the time. And I knew specifically who I wanted to work for. Her name was Bryony Wynn. Um, and I knew she was going to be speaking I can't really remember now because it was like 6 years ago, at a UNC conference. And so I was like, okay, I know she's going to be there because I've seen it advertised. I've got to go to this conference and I've got to talk to her. So I went to the conference, I stalked her, and then I ended up, getting a job after stalking. Um, and that has been the time that I now have had at Blue Cross has been probably like the most exciting and interesting point within my career. So the beginning few years that I was at Blue, I was essentially on their strategy team, helping stand up new partnerships for them, which a lot of that was new for me. I had never structured a partnership before. Um, I didn't really have an M&A background. Um, I didn't really have the background in terms of like corp dev where you know how to structure relationships and investments. Um, and and so I had to learn a lot of it on the job. Luckily, there were people there who did have a lot of experience in that, so I was able to kind of get really hands-on learning from people who were experienced. But I also went online and bought textbooks and applied what I learned from textbooks to the job and would ask questions about the things that were in the textbooks that we weren't applying in real life to kind of understand why. And then I also got out there and talked to a bunch of people with investing backgrounds who were in my network and just came to them humbly and said, "Hey, how would you do this? How would you approach this?" And I got really good advice and got a number of reps under that. And then my role at Blue Cross after doing that for a couple years ended up completely changing, where through a lot of the work that we had been doing on the investment side, um, it became clear that it was important that we start to take a different role in the state as it relates back to what I was telling you all about how people are really looking for insurers to show up and what they are looking for us to do. Um, we recognized this, I guess I would say, about 4 years ago, that people were really looking for us to play a different role, but we weren't really well equipped to do it. And the only way for us to do it would be for us to be beyond a payer. We can't just be a payer in order to deliver this. We have to have other parts of the ecosystem, and in the parts where we don't have those, like where we don't actually have the other parts of the ecosystem, we have to partner differently. We have to partner more thoughtfully. We have to structure different relationships to be able to get to the end goal that was important to us. And so both myself and then my boss, Sunny Goyle, who's also a Keenan Flagler alum, it was really the two of us who built the business case for our diversified business group, brought it to our board, got it approved, and then since that time have embarked on a number of different acquisitions uh, in order to kind of bring the different pieces that we believe are important to be able to drive affordability and a simpler system underneath our diversified business group. Um, and so I stand before you today, and after having started with nothing underneath us about 4 years ago, we now have 1.1 million lives. We have about 100 clinics across the state focused on independent primary care and behavioral health, as well as urgent care. Um, and we have the fastest growing line of business for Blue Cross in terms of their traditional business through our um, self-insured. I'm going to bore you now. I'm not going to tell you what this line of business is. Just know that we've done a lot to actually help the core even grow its own business by bringing it capabilities that is offering greater flexibility to employers who are like seeking health insurance. So we've been, a great asset for Core Blue in that as well. And so I think in many ways, if you were to look at me on paper when I came to Blue, I'm totally unqualified for the job that I currently have. But you could also never now say that I'm unqualified because I built it. It was me and my boss who did it. And a lot of it was through um, really just not being afraid to ask questions, but ask questions in the right way. Like you've done your own research, you've taken it absolutely as far as you can take it using structured thinking, and then you ask questions. Um, and then just being more passionate than the other folks in the room. It's amazing how when you care more, you do more, and that just translates into how you show up for work. So that's the long and the short of me. I was told to take 20 minutes. It just turned 20. So I think hopefully I did it. And I guess I'll open it up to you, Suzanne, for any questions.
Absolutely. And I'll take a pause again too, because we've got a really big crowd. So if you would mind, I'm just going to open it for a couple of questions and then we can move back to the moderator questions. I just don't want anybody to miss out on that. So at this point in time, we're going to field a couple of questions if anybody has those at this time. So again, you can unmute, you can raise your digital hand, or go ahead and type in the chat. Again, only if you really can't get on. Just posing. Well, then I will start because I got just a clarifying question. Because you said phone a friends. I really enjoyed hearing that phrase. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is and how you use that?
Yeah. So phone a friends is essentially somebody who's in your network who is who knows more about a problem that you're trying to tackle than you do. And the great thing about where you guys are right now is that so many of your classmates are going to turn into your phone of friends. You're going to have people go off in operations. You're going to have people go off and be investors. You're going to have people go off and be consultants who, did a project really similar to this problem that you're now facing at work. And so by keeping those relationships and then just remembering that you have them as resources, it's a tremendous tool that you have in your tool belt. The other thing that I would encourage folks to remember is that it's not just students who can be phone friends, but if you have a strong relationship with your professor, um, they can be phone friends too. Obviously, you want to be very thoughtful of their time, but the relationships that you form with them are genuine, and they're excellent resources as well as you encounter different challenges within your career.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Because, and again, too, we always encourage students, don't only look up, look around, because
Yes.
that, and again, there's more folks here that are going to be very valuable, close friends, but also will be professional networks for you. So I
Well,
see, oh, go
before
ahead.
before you go to Gianna, um, I do just want to say that have actually found in my career that my peer phone friends have been a more powerful resource for me than any mentor that I've had. And that's not to say that mentors are not an incredibly important tool. They are. But mentors only also are going to have so much time for you, particularly if you're not working for them. They've got their own teams that they're caring for and mentoring. And so as you have, a challenge pop up where you're just kind of realizing that night, oh crap, I have to get this deliverable out tomorrow, or I have, this deck that I need to turn around quickly and I need to understand how XYZ works. The people who are going to be able to get on the phone with you more quickly and really help you as peer-to-peers are the people who are kind of more people who started off on your level and on your classmates and are the people who've kind of gone up through the ranks with you. And so those are the folks who even now still, as they're looking for jobs, I'm helping position them. If I were to ever leave Blue Cross, they'd be the first people I'd call when thinking about positioning me for new opportunities. I completely agree with what you said, Suzanne, that you can't overlook the power of your peer network.
Definitely. And thank you for that addition. So again, students really take this in. All right, Gianna.
Hi. I'm currently pre-med with an interest in healthcare management, and I wanted to ask what tend to be some of the most difficult decision-making moments you face in your position?
Mhm. I think that's a tough one. I think some of the hardest ones can be actually around people management. and deciding how much is the right, and if you have someone who's not performing, how much is the right level of investment to give? What's kind of my level of obligation in terms of reaching out to them, investing in them, giving them the tools that they need to be successful? And where does that obligation kind of end based on their level of effort back? I think, that's one of the trickiest things that you kind of navigate through your career, because you always want to lead with kindness. And you always want to lead from a place of trying to show up for people and invest in people. But even for, smart, like great folks like yourselves, there may be a job that you're in that's just like not the right fit for you. It's just not, the culture is not right, or it doesn't play to your strengths. It's just part of it. And so I think that's also part of what you should be looking for in terms of like your boss and your mentor is, if you're not in the right spot, are they going to actually invest and help you get to where you need to be, even if it's not on their team? Maybe where you need to be is actually a different team, and that's okay. That's not a failure. Sometimes that's actually a strength, to realize where your strengths are and to get positioned in a place where that is playing to your individual strengths. I think sometimes when you're going through school, you're kind of made to feel like these and it's not from school itself, it's just kind of by being in the same environment with everyone else. It almost becomes a little bit of an echo chamber where these like three paths are the only paths that, can lead to success. You should be a consultant, you should be an investment banker, you should be a doctor. And if you're not one of those things, then, maybe you're not top. And I think, the more I see of the world and how many roles there are, and like how many different types of positions there are, you realize just how wrong that is. Um, the world is a very big place. The job market is a very big place, and no matter what your interests are and what your strengths are, there's probably something out there that's a perfect match to it. And there's so many more paths than the ones that you hear about most frequently.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I just want to build on that and say thank you, Tricia. I saw a lot of my peers over here smiling when you mentioned that there are so many roles out there. And I think that this can be built on when you talked about the skill sets, like you wanted to mesh to make sure that you were using the skills that made you feel good, that you were good at, but then something that you had passion for. So again, now that you're out in the working world, what skills do you feel like you use the most? They may not be the skills that you heard like in college, that those were the ones you needed. And also, how can our students gain those skills themselves?
Yeah. The most important skill that I have learned is structured thinking. And for folks who aren't familiar, um, it's essentially the ability to take very complex problems, break them down into their parts so that any complex problem becomes simple. And the first way that I actually was exposed to structured thinking was through preparing for case interviews, because it really pulls, if you don't get formulaic about it and you just kind of embrace, because there's a way to just probably memorize all the formulas behind it and kind of like miss the intention that you could get thrown any question, and you've taken the chance to take a step back and say, okay, this is actually a question that's trying to get at the size of this market. How would I break down how I would get to the size of this market? Um, Once you can master that, which, going through a case interview process is a helpful, I think, start to kind of prime you for that. But I think you know, there's probably books or other things that can help you kind of take it beyond that. My first job focused on that a lot, so it just became part of what I did because you were just doing it every day. But once you have that in your toolkit, you can apply it to anything that gets thrown over the fence at you. And for me, at least, that's why even though I hadn't done a major acquisition before, um, it was okay. Like you're able to break down into the pieces of, okay, what's going to be important for Blue Cross when making a determination as to whether or not they should do this deal. Okay, for each of those pieces, how do I ensure that, you know, this asset checks the box for those pieces? Okay, I don't know the answers to some of those inputs. Let me figure out how to get the answers to some of those inputs. And then you actually end up having like a fully filled in puzzle piece. So I think structured thinking is one of the most underrated skills, and certainly there's not like a class that specifically focuses on structured thinking. But it's essentially a framework to help you solve any problem you might encounter in your career.
That's terrific. And I love that. Those are the transferable skills of which we always speak. And there are a number of courses that I think students can take. And even if you're not in the business school, I'm pasting one in for everyone. And it's Nursing 625I. And it actually, this year, Blue Cross Blue Shield was, so they were a number of the judges and they sponsored the final pitch for that class. So I'm going to sit here. For some reason, the chat's running slow, so I just entered. It'll pop up hopefully in a second. But thank you so much for that, because I do feel that those transferable skills are so very important. And I just wanted to shout out, talking about phone a friend, you could also chat a friend. We actually have one of our partners that we have, so we've got, you can see in the chat, Mike actually explained, Mike Rowan, a little bit about the self-insured. So anybody who wants to look in there, there's a little bit about what self-insured is. So thank you, Mike. Again, too, this is all about networks and partners. But again, I'm going to pause and see if anybody would like to raise their hands. I've got a million questions, but I want you all to have the chance to answer your questions as well. And don't be shy. Again, too, that's all. This is, again, when we talk about asking questions, this is the way you gather information, and you just kind of learn. All right, Anna.
Hi, Tricia. It's nice to meet you. I did have a question. So you mentioned earlier, like in your journey to where you are today, when you decided that you were ready to move on from your previous job in the consulting space, and you found someone specific that you wanted to work with. How did you find this person, and what about them made you decide that they were going to be the right fit for someone to mentor and to work with?
Yeah, love that question. I'm going to give you a bit of a long-winded answer, so I apologize in advance. I think there's two pieces to this. The first is, how did I figure out which companies I wanted to target? And so I'm going to answer that piece first, because that allows you to then narrow in on the people, which I will then also answer like your specific question around that, because I think that's a really important question of like, what should you be looking for in a boss? But in terms of how did I narrow in on like the specific companies, one book that I highly recommend is called The 2-Hour Job Search. It essentially, so I'll just say that whenever I was graduating, when I myself was a Keenan Flagler, I think I applied to like 110 jobs or something crazy like that. And I think I only ended up with like, I don't know, six offers or something. Like the funnel the funnel wasn't great in terms of the amount of energy that was applied to offers. And I will tell you, it only gets worse when you're not in school and you don't have employers kind of like specifically looking for you as a cohort to hire. And so you can waste a lot of energy just kind of like throwing out applications, like tailoring your resume to the application just for like the AI bot to say no to you, or you get in the interview and you don't really want it, but you just keep going forward anyway. And so what the 2-hour job search does is really helpful for is kind of helping you narrow in on, what is it that you're looking for? Which companies offer what you are looking for? And so therefore, where should you be focusing your energy? And it helped me at least get down to what I was looking for to only really be, made me realize that actually the only company I really want to work for right now is Blue Cross. So I'm not going to waste energy on any of the rest of these companies. But I kind of needed to go through that exercise to come to that realization. And so then after realizing I wanted to go back to Blue, and that was the only thing that was kind of checking all the boxes of what I was looking for. For me, when coming across Bryony, she very clearly was somebody who was trying to do things differently in healthcare. And to me, that was really important and a big part of why I wanted to return to Blue. Is because I believe that she was a leader who was trying to make positive change. And so that was a big part of the reason why I kind of narrowed in on her. But when thinking about, accepting a role or kind of evaluating your potential future boss, which you always should do, right? Because it's a two-way street. It shouldn't just be them evaluating you. I mean, you don't want to be overt about the fact that you're evaluating your future employer. That doesn't go well in interviews. But for you to kind of quietly be doing that and filing things away, I think you want to make sure that it's an environment that's going to invest in you. For talent coming in at your level, what are the progression paths? What are the type of training opportunities they offer? Do you get a sense that the person you'd be working for actually cares about their team, about people? Because all of those things matter when you're in the job.
Thank you.
Richard.
Yes, thank you again for your time tonight, Tricia. Since you introduced the 2-hour job search and my friend Steve Dalton, I had to ask the next question. Can you share a little bit more?
Wait, is he actually your friend?
I know him through acquaintances, and he actually came and spoke last year to MBAs here at Keenan Fagler and stuff. So
It's pretty cool.
I was on a webinar earlier today, actually, where he joined because Lindsay Pollock and Jeremy Scheffling were presenting about the job search. So, but my question to you was, I wanted you to share a little more. I work in the career services space here at Keenan Flagler. I know a lot of students, they still have that hesitancy to reach out, whether it's on LinkedIn or through email. I want you to share a little bit more on how you were able to kind of maybe overcome any fears and reaching out directly to that individual who you really wanted to work for, knowing that she was going to be at a conference, and maybe share, I've talked to students ad nauseum about the advantages of reaching out, but I know, it's still not the easiest thing to do. And sometimes the ROI and the returns are not what students are anticipating.
Yeah, I think so. I think the way that gets you the highest ROI for a reach out is when it's genuine and when it's targeted. So you can go on kind of a spree where you just send emails to as many people as, your free LinkedIn will allow you to be able to reach out. And you may get somebody who's willing to take a phone call from you on the other side of that. But what I have found to be the most effective way to really like radically increase your chances of having someone respond to you, it is by you truly being passionate enough about something where you're putting the effort in to really make it personal and really talk about why you care about it, why you think that person is interesting, or why you think their role is interesting. And I think in the case where you take the time to truly tailor it, you will be hard pressed to find people who will purposefully not get back to you. It may mean that it doesn't mean that always people will get back to you, by the way. I'll admit that I myself, like, especially during times when I'm hiring, the number of messages that you get are like kind of overwhelming. And so you'll mean to answer something and then you just forget. So you also shouldn't be afraid to follow up, because oftentimes people, honestly, it just like slipped their mind. It's not like, the girl or guy not texting you back where, it's kind of probably wasn't an accident. In this case, it really is very easy to kind of have these things slip your mind, particularly if you're reaching out to somebody who's higher up, because the amount of kind of email traffic and in-mail they get, it's a lot. It's a lot for a person to keep up with. So I definitely recommend reaching out to people. I think that actually can be a great way to start even just like a mentoring relationship, even if it doesn't turn into a job. But keep it genuine, keep it thoughtful, and have done your homework beforehand, where you understand like who they are, like their role, why you actually think their role is interesting, what their company has been up to. With ChatGPT, it shouldn't actually take you that long to do the research necessary to be able to come to that conversation thoughtfully.
Thank you. I'll share one thing that I learned on the webinar today that I found was fascinating. Lindsay revealed that, I guess, in talking to someone recently, like if you reach out to 10 people and if you only get one response, 10% hit rate, that one person is going to be more valuable than the other 9 who didn't respond. So I thought that was pretty unique. So you just need that one kind of supporter who does respond, and then can really, really help you out regardless of what, you're seeking and stuff. So just something to keep in mind, because I know it's not easy.
Great.
But you also have the benefit of being students. I think it's really different when a student reaches out, because it's somebody who's clearly just like trying to learn, trying to look for mentorship. I mean, most of the cold reach outs that I get are people trying to sell me something, right? Like that's not who you guys are, what you're trying to do. It's kind of a nice moment for them too, to have the opportunity to like get to talk to a student, maybe get to help a student. Like that's an altruistic thing. I think it's Benjamin Franklin. I'm not going to get it quite right. But there's a quote from Benjamin Franklin that essentially talks about like one of the best ways to kind of ingratiate yourself with someone is to ask them for a favor. And I've really actually found that to be true. Like if you send somebody a flattering message about how you look up to them and like all the things that they've done, and then ask them if they wouldn't mind sharing some of their advice. I mean, gosh, who wouldn't love to receive a message like that? I mean, that's so flattering. So I think realize that, kind of the power that brings too, and that many people would find it actually to be a high compliment to be reached out to by bright students like yourselves.
Thank you, Richard and Tricia. Exactly. I think that's wonderful. And also put yourself, I like the way you said you found someone at a conference. Students, I can guarantee you that it's 100% hit rate. If you
Yeah.
walk up during a lunch or a breakfast and you start talking to someone, I have never seen one time someone walk away from a student. So again, put yourself in those spaces. And next, oh, I see Walter. Walter.
You're on mute.
Whoop.
Oops. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Walter. I'm a freshman here at UNC. I was just curious about your education and how many of the classes you took at UNC were more of science and healthcare versus how much of your classes were like business, and then how that ratio of knowledge kind of transferred into your action into the real world.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. So I went almost the entirety of the pre-med track. Which like I look back now and I was like, wow, so much pain, no gain. For me. No, it was actually super helpful because the role that I ended up taking for the pharmaceutical and biotech role, a lot of it you needed to actually understand the science to be able to understand to understand like the potential of the drug. So it was, despite my jokes, it was actually very useful. So I went through the entirety of the pre-med track for the most part. I think there was like one class that I didn't end up taking, and then obviously a fair number of business school classes. Also was super nerdy, and even after I'd finished all my classes, I audited a bunch of classes in the business school that I just thought were like interesting. And so that was like my primary mix, and then I did as little of the general education classes on core campus as humanly possible. Just, that was just a personal thing where, again, like for me, so much of it comes down to what am I passionate about? And those classes on the whole, like for the most part, just like did not speak to me the same way that the business school classes and some of the science classes did, just because my brain is like super pragmatic. And so it just was more of what I enjoyed. And so I think in terms of like how that ended up kind of helping with my career, the business school classes were by far and away the most relevant classes for what I ended up doing in my job and what I still do in my job. Like the basic accounting classes, super helpful to be able to speak the same language as like the CFOs and our treasurer and other folks, because accounting is actually the language of how business gets done. And a lot of people don't really like realize that or realize how central it is to decision making, and like little nuance things within finance can have huge implications for your financials. And so if you want to have kind of responsibility for some type of profit and loss, P&L, going forward, being able to have some like a basic understanding of accounting is a really important building block for that. A lot of the classes around, executive presence and, speech making, I can't remember what they were called, but those were super helpful too. I did STAR and the consulting framework classes, and they were both extremely helpful too, because they just gave you a taste of what it would be like to be tasked with a problem at work that, you have to solve. Like a lot of those things that you're tasked with in those classes are like literally like my projects at work. So it's just like a helpful, I think, primer to get exposure to the types of things that you'll be asked to do on the job. The the other one that stood out actually is the Management 101 class, which I don't know, I might not be saying what the name of that class is, but it's essentially you would like read cases, or there would be videos about different management situations, and then they would help, the teacher would kind of talk you through what you might be able to do when you face those situations. And it's been amazing how many of those have been helpful in the real world as well. So I'm a big fan of the business school and its curriculum in terms of preparing people for the real world. Yeah, basically. Basically.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely great question. And again, too, everybody's popped in a few things over to the side. I did pop in a little bit about our minors, but also there are classes like Busy 100. Everybody can take that. I mean, why not? Try it. You might love it. So again, Tricia, that's fantastic. And I do want to kind of piggyback on that question from Walter. you had a lot of great experiences. You kind of sounded like a dream student to me, like you were just kind of auditing classes. But is there anything that you wish you had taken advantage of as a student, or along your journey that you didn't?
Yeah. Um, well, so I was only a dream student about the classes I cared about. So what has been true about me in my career was also true about me as a student. Um, Fun fact, I think the class that I did the worst in at UNC was my intro to philosophy class, and they made us write a paper on why people are birds, not why people are like birds, why people are birds. I could not write the paper. Because the whole premise doesn't make sense. Anyway, but to actually answer your question, I think so. I've talked a lot about keeping in touch with professors, and the reason why I keep mentioning it is because it's something that I wish that I had did. While I was at UNC, I did make some really, genuine connections with some of my professors. Like I mentioned, one of them is the guy who essentially helped me get my first job. And I really didn't keep in touch with any of those folks, and I really do regret that because, those are folks who have really invested in you and genuinely care. And when you genuinely care back, like it's amazing, and you should, keep those relationships. I think the other thing, that I wish that I had done is, actually done some type of exchange program or some type of like abroad experience. Not necessarily study abroad, um, but an experience where you get to maybe like see what it's like to work in another country, or an experience where I know UNC has Keenan Flagler has things where you can like tour factories in other countries and like see how things actually get produced, from start to finish. I think you have a unique ability to really understand how global business gets done, not just business in the US. And I don't think that I took enough advantage of that opportunity to kind of like fully have the understanding that I wish that, I had today. So that's one of the things that, if the opportunity is there and makes sense for you, I would definitely do it.
Terrific. And we've got about 8 minutes left, so I want to put this back out for some more fantastic questions. Being good about the pause. I'm not always good about that. Okay. So I'm going to give you a minute to think, and I am going to move on. And so what recommendations do you have? Because again, as you said, there's so many different roles in the healthcare ecosystem. What recommendations would you give to students to kind of explore those? And like every day there's something new, as you said, AI. There are going to be a whole new range of roles. What suggestions would you give to students to kind of start diving in?
It's a good question without a super clear-cut answer, because it is such a broad industry. I can't remember the exact statistic. I bet somebody on this call would know. But the US healthcare systems, if you were to turn it into an economy, I can't remember exactly what place it would be in the world, but it was somewhere in the top 10 largest economies in the world. If you just thank you, Mike. I knew one of you smart people would know. So you know, when you look at it from that lens, there's so many different roles that one might be able to take. I think where I would encourage people to start is thinking about the types of problems that you have found interesting. So, if you are for example, have found, I'm just going to pick something, like if you have found that accounting, well, maybe that's not the right one to pick on. If you have found that you loved solving, that you find it really interesting to understand, like how the operations of different things move from one place to another, then my recommendation for you would be to try and find a role that would give you an appreciation for how those decisions are made and how why things actually flow through the system in the way that they do. I think once you kind of determine an area or a general area of interest, my recommendation to you all for your first job would be to try and find a role that allows you to understand incentives and then how incentives drive decisions. Because once you get an understanding of how that works in healthcare, it gives you a bit of a playbook that you can refer back to that's super useful for any other, kind of related job that you might want to do in healthcare. Kind of tying it back to my career journey, it may seem super unrelated that I did all of this work understanding pharmaceuticals in that industry, and now I'm in the payer industry, like buying companies. It's kind of, the tie isn't super clear, but so much of what I did in my first couple roles in that pharma space was you had to actually understand everything about all parts of the healthcare system. Like, how are you deciding which drugs to invest in pharma company? What are the incentives from our government, from the way pricing works downstream that's causing you to invest in these drugs, these molecules, versus other ones you could be investing in, right? Then as you move through, how are you choosing which indications you're going to run your trials for? Oh, well, that's tied to money too. How does that actually tie to money? And then how does that actually drive your decision making? Then you're trying to figure out how you actually get these, drugs into people's hands. Sales and marketing logistics also tied to how the money moves. But once you can start to kind of get an appreciation for these incentives and how it drives decisions in whatever part of healthcare is interesting to you, it gives you kind of like a shorthand logic that will help you in any challenge that you're kind of taking on in any type of new area. So I think that that's really important, that you get that exposure and perspective kind of early in your career, because then you will get it. You'll get why people are doing the things that they're doing. You'll get why your executives are making the decisions that they're making, which, will, and by being someone who understands that and kind of intuitively gets that, you find yourself in situations where you're getting more projects, more things, which creates more, forward opportunities for you. But I think it's really important in order to kind of have that happen, that you get the appreciation for how decisions are made and why, and a lot of that comes back to incentives. But you can only, unfortunately, that's not something that you're going to be able to just like pick up a book and then understand how all of this works. It's really by getting a role that gives you exposure to see what's behind why people are making the decisions they're making.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you so much. And again, too, we have only a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to ask you one more quick question. What do you feel, as we're kind of moving forward in healthcare, what would you say would be one of your top trends that you think students should focus on as they're kind of looking forward? Something, I mean, again, let's put AI out, or even if you're going to say AI, something more specific.
Yeah. So what I have found is if you can become the expert in a new area, then all of a sudden you are actually the expert in that area because it's new. There's not someone who can have, 30 years of legacy knowledge that even though you are an expert, you will actually not be the true expert in the room. But if you can be the one to truly understand the new thing that's coming down and be able to apply it, then all of a sudden you actually have a competitive advantage and like a differentiation compared to all the folks who are currently at that company. And so I think AI is actually a really good one because nobody actually really understands it or how it's going to be applied or which use cases might be most powerful. But I also think, Suzanne, that it's a really good point that you can't just say AI blanketly because there's going to be a lot of companies like Blue Cross is one, for example, where we've said that we're not going to have patient or outward facing use of AI. We're going to be really thoughtful about how we use AI, and it's probably going to be like about internal efficiencies and things like that, but it's not going to be something that, you would experience with us on the outside looking in. And I think, that's probably going to be true for a lot of companies. And so if you can figure out kind of generally where you're interested in, and then you can be one of the first ones to understand something that's going to really impact that company in that space. I mean, Trump is probably going to have a whole bunch of changes that come down the pipe, and none of us are going to be able to understand them at first, right? That's part of it. But if you can be one of the people who dig in and really understand it and kind of become an expert at it, then you bring something unique to the table.
Absolutely. And it's 7:01. And if you're like me, I'm smelling my husband cooking some good dinner for me. So, but Tricia, I cannot thank you enough. This was such a wonderful fireside chat. Thank you for being so open and just supportive. And I hope the students take your advice to heart, because if they do, I think they're going to find a lot of success in addition to what they're already experiencing. So again, thank you so much. We're glad you could be with us tonight, and everybody join us next time. So have a good evening. We'll see y'all soon.
And think about Blue Cross for your future career, opportunities. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you